Everyone. We are very pleased today to have a conversation with Dr. Russ Poldrack from the Imaging Research Center at University of Texas at Austin. Dr. Poldrack received his PhD in cognitive psychology from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign and did a postdoc actually at Stanford. And he's been a faculty member all over the place, including UCLA and Harvard. But now he is in Austin. So the primary focus of the talk today, as far as I can tell, will be Cognitive Atlas Project, which is going to kind of dovetail into these other terminology talks. And by the way, a couple of little minor points just about the presentation. We'll try to, if you can type your questions into the chat box, that would really be wonderful, because we sometimes, if there are too many people talking through the speakers of the computers, then it tends to have a feedback effect. So I'll be to stop Russ when anybody has a question. So just go ahead and type it in. Is that okay, Russ? Can I just kind of stop and ask questions?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, perfect. So if you would just all silence your microphones for the duration of the talk, that would be really helpful. All right, thank you. And with that, again, we're pleased to have Dr. Poldrack, so I will now silence my own microphone, and Russ, please take it away.
Okay, well, thanks so much for inviting me. So yeah, I'm going to focus my talk on Atlas today. It's sort of, one in a sort of informatics ecosystem that's evolved in our lab, and then we've collaborated with other people on, so I'll mention some of those other projects as well. But first, I just wanted to say a little bit about kind of, why we started this project, where we see it standing. And so my interest in ontologies was really driven by interactions that I started having probably almost 10 years ago now with people in the field of psychiatry who were trying to think about how do we understand psychiatric disorders in terms of the underlying cognitive and neural processes. So I think everybody has become convinced that that the way that we chop up psychiatric disorders is probably not a neurobiologically plausible ontology of the disorders. And, there's been these search for what people have called endophenotypes, and trying to think about how should we really understand the dimensions along which psychological function vary relevant to psychiatric disorders. So the figure that I have here, which we call our layer cake figure, it sort of shows how you can think about sort of where falls in the explanatory or the mechanistic cascade from things and environments down at the bottom up to sort of diagnoses like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. That if we want to explain how you get from a particular genetic polymorphism or signaling pathway to the kind of things that psychiatrists deal with, that you have to cognition to get there. And if we be able to do that, we need to kind of be able to clearly frame what those cognitive processes are. Now, another sort of this comes from thinking about for a long time what it is that neuroimaging can tell us, because clearly neuroimaging, to these kind of things in humans, neuroimaging is the primary tool that we're going to use. And another way to think about kind of where the cognitive atlas sits is that we want to know, people cognitive neuroscience and neuroimaging are interested what actually is in the head. And so one of the things that we had to deal with, was the fact that we didn't want one group of people kind of sitting there saying, this is the structure of psychological processes, because there's a lot of people out in the world who would disagree. So we wanted to build the system in such a way that lots of people would be able to come in and contribute knowledge without having to become ontologists, without having to use something like Protege. And so we kind of saw ourselves sitting somewhere between like Wikipedia, which are really not structured enough for us to use them, and things like Protege, which are so structured. You really need expertise in informatics to be able to use them. So one of our kind of initial goals was that somebody should be able to show up and do something interesting within 5 minutes. We've spent a lot of time thinking through the interaction design, and so as I mentioned, we worked with Squishy Media to site, and they have a lot of experience in interaction design, and so we've tried to build it in such a way to really optimize the ability to interact with the site. And then, from the very beginning, the site was kind of inspired by what was coming to be learned about projects like Wikipedia and others. So Nikki Couture, who was one of the early collaborators, helped kind of frame the project. He's now at Carnegie Mellon. He's somebody who's actually studied how social collaboration works on projects like Wikipedia, and we've tried that knowledge, bring it to bear on seeing how we can optimize the ability to get people to work together to kind of frame what this knowledge is, rather than having. So I've often framed it in kind of a cathedral versus bazaar sort of metaphor, right? Where we didn't, here we really need a bazaar sort of approach to bring lots of people in, get them together. Because if you to just sort of build one top-down ontology of psychological function, um, so many people are going to buy into it that basically just going to be the Russ Poldrack ontology that no one knows about, and that's the last thing that I wanted to do. So, so this is from Eric Miller, who's the principal at Squishy Media. It kind of lays out a lot of the principles that we tried to follow in building the website, and I think that we've a lot of them, and this kind of tells you which ones we think we've lived up to. We try to make it fast and instantly useful. We try to make it as simple as possible. Um, we started along the personalization road, though, as far as we want to be. We've worked at RESTful, which basically means that everything can be accessed via a specific user, and discoverable, so people like Google can find it. We've tried to make it as clean as possible. We've gone through several sort of iterations of interaction to try to get there. And then, as I'll mention later, it's now mobile as well, as mobile as we'd like it to be. Okay, so what I want to do now is bring up my browser and just kind of walk you through sort of what it looks like here. So, so this is my data. atlas and gives you a sort of a a textual, text-based pseudo-activation map, which is what you see here for response inhibition. And then if you click into that, you'll actually be taken to the map PubBrain, and you can actually get to, if you don't know which paper which paper mentioned post-virus in the context of response inhibition, that will give that to you. Okay, so let's go back. We also have Neurosynth. So Neurosynth is a project that's been developed primarily by Tal Yarkoni at University of Colorado, and this is a project that does sort of real meta-analysis. So it automatically detects active locations in papers, and right now I think it's at about 4,300 papers in the database, and this performs an actual meta-analysis looking at the relationship between a particular term in the full text of the papers and activation at a particular location. So you see that's a slightly more finer grained way to analyze those data, and we link out to that as well. And as I'll mention later, all of the concept terms in the Cognitive Atlas have associated meta-analytic maps within Neurosynth. So basically anything you find here, you can get a map for in Neurosynth because we've done the search for those. One of the important things we have is this discussion page. And so just as in Wikipedia, when people make changes, especially on pages that have a lot of traffic and have a lot of people interested in them, you're usually suggested to first go on and raise the change in the discussion before you make it. And then once you've kind of gotten the other stakeholders in that particular term to agree, then you can make the change. Otherwise, often on Wikipedia, it'll be reverted. So we have the discussion page here that'll allow you to do that, and it hasn't gotten a lot of usage yet because we had a relatively small number of people like defining terms. But this is where if there's a problem with a particular definition, we'll bring it up and have some discussion before any changes are made. We have a bibliography, and we have a little tool where you could search PubMed. I'll just search PubMed for response inhibition, if I can spell. And we get some results back, and if we wanted to add that citation, then we say cite study, and now that'll be in our list here. I'm going to remove it for now. We also have then relationships to tasks, and so what I see as kind of the most important bit of knowledge that we contain in the Cognitive Atlas is the relationship between concepts and tasks, because tasks are something that are cut and dried in the sense that when somebody publishes a paper, you know at least roughly what task they used because of the description. We don't necessarily know what that task measures up in the head. People will tell you that they think it measures something, but other people may disagree. And so the goal of the Cognitive Atlas is to try to capture the relationships between particular measurements and particular concepts. So for example, here that I think that this particular measurement on the stop signal task measures this concept of response inhibition. Okay, so now let's go look at a task. And here you see again a definition of the task, and we have three different things that we lay out for each task. We have conditions, which are individual measurement conditions. We have contrasts, which in general are comparisons between conditions. They can also just be a comparison to a baseline. And then we have indicators, which are actually the things that are being measured. And in this case, response time and accuracy are just sort of behavioral things. But you can also imagine those relating back to brain imaging data, EEG data, um, psychophysiological measurements. Any basically you could measure on a task, you could add in as an indicator here. You can see the sort of the converse of earlier response inhibition was measured by this task. Now we say this task measures response inhibition. Another concept that we rely on here is this idea of a task phylogeny. Um, and the idea is that often a task developed from another task. So, for example, the signal task was developed and then later sort of refined into a different task called the selective stop signal task. And we go to the task phylogeny there, we see that's a descendant of the stop signal task. We have bibliography here. One thing you see down at the bottom, there's a button to notify me of changes to this page. So if you're interested in following a particular page, you click that, and then whenever something happens, any change gets made, you get a notification in your dashboard, and you can also get an email if you set up your preferences that way. And then you can also flag something for review by the curator. We have a curation sort of front page for people. We actually have a small number of curators right now, including myself, but we have this curation interface that allows us to go in, for example, and whenever anything new gets added right now, it is flagged for curation, and so there's a number of new things here that are sort of remaining to be curated because they were done recently. We have an administration interface that administrators have access to, and the main thing that lets us do is export the information in other formats, such as text files, and we can send system messages and so on. So that's kind of a general overview of what the site looks like, what it can do, and go on. Okay, let's go back to our presentation. All right, so we started this project. We had to make the choice of how are we going to build it in an ontology, build it as an ontology, or were we going to build something more custom and basically try to shoot it into an ontology language later? And we chose the latter. So basically, we decided that happy enough with any of the kind of standard ontology approaches to be able to capture all the knowledge that we wanted to capture. So we built it around a custom relational database, which gives us maximum flexibility for obtaining the kind of knowledge that we want to obtain. And then the pipe dream back then was that, well, we can come along later and create a formal ontology out of it if you want. And we didn't sort of do that for a couple of years until we actually had the in there to sort of work with. And I'll come back in a bit and talk about how we actually did that. So now let's say a bit about the structure of the. What I'm showing here is sort of a schema of the knowledge that's obtained, that's around a mental concept, and obviously a lot of this maps onto what you saw when I was walking the site, but a lot of this is kind of hidden. And so we've relied on, to the degree we can, we've relied on other existing ontologies, particularly we rely on SOS, simple knowledge organizational system. Concepts derived from the overall idea of a SCOS. We have a lot of the standard things like identifier and title. We use some of the labeling and scheme notation of SCOS. The forum, the discussion forum contents are in the SIOC forum, or sort of derived from the SIOC forum. We're still the plan is to use the SWAN citation ontology, though we haven't really implemented that yet. So right now our citations aren't really stored in a formal way that's implemented using that ontology. And then we have then within the concept itself, we have title, labels, synonyms, definition, discussion, bibliography, and so on. Then we have two different types of relationships that can hold three different types of relationships that can hold between mental concepts. One of those is a relationship. So, for example, memory is a kind of working memory. We also have a part of relationship, which we really think of, in terms we've kind of specified as this is something that plays a part in a particular mental operation. So, for example, memory retrieval is part of working memory. Then there's an error in this slide, isn't there? Because it should be working memory maintenance is also a part of working memory and is preceded by, or as maintenance would be preceded by retrieval. And so the idea is that we could, with this preceded by relationship, we can capture the temporal relations between mental concepts to start getting at some of the more mechanistic aspects of these things. Now, in the end, obviously, sort of implementing real psychological theories will require a lot more than these kind of very basic ontological relations. But we kind of started small, and we'll move up as that knowledge sort of gets baked in. Then down here you see mental tasks, and so we have identifiers for each task that will relate to concepts. These are the task concept relationships that I talked about a moment ago. We call this the measured by relationship. So this particular concept is measured by a particular contrast on a particular task. So then let's look at the schema for tasks. So again, a lot of it's very similar in terms of the overall types of things that are specified in the mental task. Mental task we have it as deriving from a Cogpo behavioral experiment, and then we one of the things that we have here is we have our different indicators, and as I mentioned before, usually right now in the database it's primarily behavioral indicators, but we could also have activation maps mapping out to their imaging databases. We could have things like ERP components mapping out to NEMO, and so on. Now the primary thing that gets measured that gets used to relate mental tasks and mental concepts is what we call a contrast. Okay, and that's basically a comparison or a function over some set of conditions. Okay, so this contrast would include some set of conditions, and for example, this might be 0 back minus 2 back. So it'd be a comparison of conditions 0 back and 2 back, and we'd say that is what one of the things that measures this particular mental concept of working memory. And so that derives from the Cogpo behavioral experiment paradigm contrast. The conditions derive from Cogpo behavioral experiment paradigm condition. And so you can see that we've really tried to sort of integrate, even though we haven't sort of fully integrated the databases, we've at least harmonized our representation so that we're using the same kind of upper concepts here to describe these things. One thing that we're still working on that we haven't implemented on the production site yet, it started to come online on the development side, is an idea of a collection. So for example, if you think about like these batteries that are often used in neuropsychology, for example, the CANTAB or like the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale, is really a battery of a number of different subtests. And so what we're doing is defining a sort of a generic thing called a collection, which derives from the Swan collections ontology. And that's going to let us define relationships between different measurements and also relationships between different concepts. So one of the things that we're going to use this task collection for is actually defining theories. So we can say some particular person has a theory of working memory and it encompasses this particular set of concepts. Those will be contained in a collection. And so that's going to be one of the things that we hope to roll out in the next few months that'll allow us to add on another layer of complexity onto the kind of stuff that we're representing here. Okay, so I mentioned that this is a field where there's a lot of stuff that very few people agree upon, so that's why we wanted to involve the community in specifying both the concepts and tasks, but particularly the relationships. What's measuring what. And there's two ways that we have of capturing disagreement. One is, I've already mentioned, the discussion forum. And the idea is that we can record the disagreement in the discussion forum so that we'll know what it is, why it is that people disagree and what their arguments are. And in the end, use that as the sort of the curator's way to kind of make the final decision about what's going to go onto the site, just as happens in Wikipedia. The second is a concept that or a notion that we refer to as concept forking. So the idea is that there's sometimes terms in the field that really have multiple meanings that are incommensurate with one another. So one that I like to use as an example is this term behavioral inhibition. So some people use the term behavioral inhibition to basically mean the same thing as response inhibition, like the ability to stop oneself from making a particular action. But there's another part of the field that uses this term to mean something very different, which is basically a temperamental characteristic of people that's described by shyness and social anxiety. And so just as in Wikipedia, if you have a concept that a concept that has multiple different senses, you'll end up at a disambiguation page. This is sort of the Cognitive Atlas version of a disambiguation page. So you may have noticed that when I was on, if I go back to the Cognitive Atlas page here, I can go, for example, to working memory. And working memory is actually one that needs to be forked because it does have multiple concepts, but we've not yet forked it. But there's a button here. I could say fork definition, and then I could specify what are the different senses of working memory. And so that's, again, possible for any particular page. Now, we really discourage forking unless really a fundamental difference in the senses in which those terms are used. But nonetheless, it's possible if a term is really used in such different ways that you can't kind of bring it together. Okay. To the dashboards. Whenever somebody creates an account, get a personalized dashboard, you can either see all the activity on or their activity, and also get other things like recent comments and concepts sort of surface to them. The idea here is to make the site somewhat personable and personalized so that people feel like they have some kind of in the project. Yeah.
Okay, so there has been a question from Ted. What if people have a legitimate disagreement about how to define this concept? That's the just came in.
Yeah. So, so there's a couple of ways to deal with that. One is to fork the concept, right? It really depends on, in the end, it depends on the measurement implications of those two definitions are different, right? If two different people have two different definitions, but they both agree that whatever that thing is, however you define it, is being measured by tasks X, Y, and Z, then what we can do is either in the definition itself basically say there are two possible definitions here, um, or we could fork it and basically say there are two different senses of this thing, and we would fork it if we thought that the sort of the things that are measuring the things that are measuring that concept are different. So we've not run into that yet, but I'm sure that we will, and so those are the two ways that we can deal with it.
Uh, okay, Ted says thank you. That's great. Uh, so Jess says, "Good point, Russ. We didn't include that picture in our presentation, so actually, it's good that you bring it in."
there I'll stop and we can sort of jump into free-for-all if you want.
Yep, you should be able to turn on your microphones as you like. So I have a couple of, or I have at least one lead-off question while people are fiddling with their microphones. But my question is, always from the NIPS perspective. So essentially, if you have mapped all of your terms, and let's pretend they're all mapped. I'm sure they're not, but let's pretend that they're all mapped to Cognitive Atlas. I'm sorry, CogPo. So if I include CogPo, what am I missing? If I include Cognitive Atlas also, what is the?
Wait, I'm sorry. If you just have question, if you just have CogPo, what has Atlas got that CogPo doesn't? Is that the question?
Yes. Yes. Like what am I? Because this is going to come up next week, right?
Yeah. Oh, Cog Atlas goes way beyond CogPo. I mean, CogPo is basically focusing on the experimental methods, and
yeah. So I guess the way I would frame it is that Cognitive Atlas sort of stops at the names of the conditions and the things that are in the contrast, whereas CogPo goes down much deeper and actually defines what those things mean. So I see them as really kind of symbiotic, where we will so we'll have a particular task or condition. Then if you want to know more about it, you click on the link to go to CogPo and find out exactly how that was defined for this particular paper.
Exactly.
Okay. So then, what about things like identifiers, synonyms, and other things? So you talk about these disambiguation pages and where you fork the concept into two separate categories or concepts, really.
Yep.
Do each of those concepts now have a unique set of synonyms, have unique identifiers that I can possibly use?
Yes. Yes. So the forked. So basically, the disambiguation page and the forked definitions all have separate unique identifiers after forking occurs. And basically what you can do is you can derive. So in general, if you're going to fork, what you want to do is if there's an existing definition, you want to basically assign it to one of the two things. It's one of the n things that's being forked in. And what you would do is basically say, assign all this information to this one particular fork in the road, and then you'd have to go in and define the other one, and they would have their own separate set of synonyms and so on.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
It would be basically like completely independent concepts, except that they have that upper disambiguation thing above them.
All right. That is a very nice interface, by the way, to Tal's work, and I see Tal on here. I don't know.
He says hi.
He does say hi, but he doesn't. Yeah. He doesn't speak.
And we're actually, we have planned to have a more direct interface to NeuroSynth, just as we do to PubBrain. Once we get the ability to do kind of in-browser surfacing of those images, that's not too far away.
Yeah, actually, that's a really good idea. They're beautiful images. So.
Yeah, and I think that part of the goal here is to do whatever we can to make it a site that people want to come back to, right? So, sort of surfacing as much information as we can. Even though, to some degree, like the pub brain stuff is, if you came for the definition of working memory, you're not necessarily looking for, what brain parts are people talking about, but to the degree that we can kind of be a portal related to, many different aspects of this stuff, we think that that's a good way to sort of, keep bringing people back.
Oh, that's great. And I think, from the, also okay, so Tal says, apparently he's in a room full of people, so he's not going to turn on his microphone. But he says, oh, can you read that, actually?
Yeah. So once papers are tagged with concepts in cognitive whatever, we can generate meta-analysis maps in Neurosynth right away. So yeah, so I think that's a nice way to kind of integrate across all of these things, that we can, whatever gets built in, one system can get propagated to the others.
That's very nice. Actually, that is very, very nice. Jess, you can talk.
Well, I was thinking that there's a lot of steps in finding the right level of detail to get the right papers for meta-analysis. I mean, a huge something Angie and I have been thinking about a lot is when you actually are trying to identify papers for meta-analysis, you spend a lot of time sifting through which ones are really comparable and which ones are not. I think that it's going to be groups, well, like what Tal and Russ and Angie and I have been.
Well, I think there's
doing.
There's different ways to do that, right? There's, certainly the way that, I mean, I think there's the two ends are the brain map philosophy and the neurosynth philosophy, where the brain map philosophy is, find papers that that the experimenter thinks matches, right?
Yes, exactly.
The neurosynth way is basically find papers that, well, I guess starting out, Tal says there's the crappy neurosynth way in his comment. I don't really believe that. The neurosynth way is to basically to start out finding any papers that that happen to expose the data in an HTML accessible way, but then finding papers that use those particular terms in the text, right? So it's really about it's about sort of a curated approach versus a manually curated approach, and I think certainly each has its own cost benefits.
Exactly.
Yep. No, this is a really nice and important project, and I think from the NIF perspective, we'd like to sit down and make sure that we have a way to kind of interoperate between all of these systems. I mean, we're certainly not going to ever replace any of these systems, but we all want to know sort of where the best plugs are, and how do we kind of all help each other to continue to be as interoperable and have the data flow into as many places as it absolutely needs to. So it's really nice. I have not seen your Sparkle endpoint yet, but I will theoretically. I have actually run a Sparkle query recently, which surprised me terribly.
Yeah, I mean, it actually I think that the OWL ontology is potentially probably a more useful tool. I know that's what Fahim has been working with for the NIF integration, or the Neuralex integration. Sorry. Because that probably has a better sort of structure to it, though. I guess it depends on what you can do with the Sparkle. Fahim was typing.
I believe that Fahim was typing something, but I'm not sure why he's not speaking. Perhaps he does not have a microphone. But in any case, yeah. But the OWL way, if it is limited, does not need to be the way that we work with you.
Well, yeah, it all depends on what you're trying to do.
Right. I mean, if we want
a lot of what Russ has really done very well is try to make things publicly available, and I think you guys at NIF have done a very similar kind of thing, which is to really put a lot of effort into making usable interfaces for a lot of information. That's really helpful.
Yep.
But if you want to actually, reason over what the difference is between 100 millisecond stimulus and a 110 millisecond stimulus, you're going to end up more with stuff that looks like what Gwen had for Nemo, where you really get into the level of detail.
Right.
Logically you need to represent.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I should say that, and obviously, this relates to the fact that I'm not an ontologist. We've not put a lot of thought into, how this stuff is going to be used for reasoning down the road, just because
Yeah.
I see that as being so far off.
I know.
That
I'm much more optimistic about that.
Right. Yeah, no, and we've been mostly just trying to figure out, how do we capture the basic knowledge, and again, I guess I've been convinced by my colleagues who work, who know a lot more about ontologies than I do, that getting everything you can and then trying to shoehorn it into something that works later is a good, as opposed to trying to build a cathedral from the beginning.
Yep. No, that's a perfectly legitimate way to work. I mean, a lot of times you want to go with a less structured entity. And actually, Leon, who also is on here, he has a paper out which kind of takes a look at the various ontology representations of brain regions. Lovely labels that we put onto ontologies aren't necessarily ever used in the literature. So put onto ontologies aren't necessarily literature. So
Hang on, I lost you.
I think we have. Yeah, no, I think we had Leon turn on his mic, and then everything got. Yep. Yeah. Leon was trying to actually speak, and so if we can shut down our microphones, we should be able to.
Maybe he'll just type.
Oh, but he is typing instead. Yeah. Okay. All right. It's okay. But yeah, I mean that. So basically, working from a data set, which is essentially the terminology that people actually use, I think, is a very legitimate way to move forward. And I think, so this will really, I think, help ground some of these things, even though, we may not perfectly define the things that we think we're trying to define. But we'll at least define how these things are actually used in the literature, which is, essentially the thing that we are at the end trying to represent. So, just kind of thinking out loud here, this is, one of the reasons why we created the NeuralX, because it's kind of an interplay between the community and then, these higher kind of level structures, ontological structures. And Leon French apparently agrees with me. Thank you. The synonym information, the text miners. Yeah, I think that's one of the major things that I would be looking for here too, because we use the synonyms in the NIF as an automatic expansion, and so I actually just did a couple of literature searches in the NIF, and we have a really tiny amount of full text literature. It's only from the open subset, open access subset, which has its own problems. But we actually pull back quite a bit of literature from that because of these synonyms. So it's really nice. And Jess says, yes, there's ontological purity, and there's how we actually think. Yes. I think the ontological purity does help us think about some of these things, but in terms of the labels that are actually used, the things that are actually used in the literature, we need to, also continue to think about how those.
Yeah, I mean, the other big challenge right now, to be honest, is just getting more people to actually
this is great work,
contribute.
Russ, and
That,
we just need to make sure that
we had a
represent it.
when we had people come by, tell us how great it was, pick up a T-shirt, grab the iPhone app, and then radio silence afterwards. And so we've the thing that we're struggling with is getting a critical mass of contributors, not just people using it and coming and looking at it, but actually contributing to it. And so I think that to the degree that people can sort of evangelize their friends and neighbors to, to tell them not just to look at it, but to think about actually contributing, certainly that's what I've been trying to do. And we've some people who started contributing a decent amount. But I think, in order to really capture the entire field, we need an order of magnitude or a couple orders of magnitude more people. And we need some real kind of arguments going, I think. And that's what we haven't had much of yet is kind of, really people getting into it about stuff. To the degree that we've had people contributing, it's, one particular one particular sort of view gets expressed, and then that's, how it is. Okay, so Jim says he's going to engage ISI to get engaged in this. That's great. I think that'd be really useful.
Yeah, particularly that domain, that subdomain.
That would be really useful.
But I think.
Yep.
Oh, hang on. I think,
Another thing you could,
Russ, you will find
sure.
that's actually a good model that people work on what they're really interested in. I mean, certainly that's been how I know how BrainMap has often grown. Is somebody needs to do a meta-analysis, and in order to use the tools, they end up putting all the information into the BrainMap database. And I think as we start linking what you've got here out to other resources as well, people are going to be like at Tal site saying, well, no, that's not the term I would have used. How do I fix that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. That's a very good point. I was just going to bring in that Marianne's actually had some success with having her students add a lot of these brain regions and other things.
Yeah, no, I've
so she's
certainly
just gone through
a ton of the work on the cognitive analysis has been done by grad
X,
students in my lab and a few other labs who I've kind of
a project that she put into her class. So that's another thing to really think about.
The actual
she
labor.
had pretty decent success with that. And these are grad students, but as an aside.
Would I post the slides somewhere? Sure. Yeah. Anita, do you have a place I can put them, or I can just send you a link to somewhere?
Yep. And we have one more question coming up. Okay. Would you post the slide somewhere? Yes, we should be able. Yeah, send me either the